Hi everybody. So, the first talk of this season of Codebar Festival is Thriving in Managerial Silence, or more appropriately, Thriving Professionally in Managerial Silence. Before I go on, talking more about the topic of the talk or about myself, I'd like to ask you all a question, right? So, let's envision a scenario collectively. You land your first job in tech and you're really excited. You're ready to learn, ready to grow. But weeks go by and you realize that your manager barely checks in. You barely hear from them. Reality hits and you get to know that rather your manager is, let's say, absent. Feedback is pretty rare. Recognition seems like a myth. What do you do? Right? So, the natural tendency is to wonder whether you're doing anything wrong. You ask yourself, is my work even getting noticed? You wait for recognition, you wait for guidance, you wait for a manager who may never show up. The second part, on the other hand, looks something like this. You recognize the pattern of unavailability and you take control. You advocate for yourself, you manage up, and you create your own growth plan. This talk is about the second choice, which is how to thrive professionally when no one else is advocating for you. A brief introduction to myself. I am Harshita. I am live from India right now. I work as a professional software development engineer at Mobile Premier League, which is a gaming company. So, precisely, I make games. This is my first time speaking at Codebar, and I'm really, really excited. And apart from Code Bar, I really find joy in speaking at conferences about topics like gamification or developer education or developer relations. So I've previously been a part of conferences like DevRelCons or MLX HackCon or Google StepFest. So yeah, apart from that, when I'm not making games or when I'm, not engaging in developer communities, you'll find me reading fiction, writing fiction, or the best of all, solving cryptic crosswords. So yeah, that's it about me. Coming back to the talk, which is thriving in managerial silence. We have the problem set defined in front of our eyes right now, right? And before we get into solutions, it's important to recognize the behavioral pattern that is being exhibited here, right? So, case one could be that you have a manager who is simply unavailable. They barely check in, and a call scheduled with them would more often than not end up getting cancelled, and responses to your questions will be delayed. So, while this might be happening because they trust you to be independent, you sometimes wish for more direction as an employee, more clarity, more guidance, right? As a second scenario, you might have a manager who is extremely transactional. They're focused on deliverables, they ensure things get done, which feels great, right? But they may not engage at all in mentorship or in discussions about your growth. I mean, first things first, they're not obligated to, right? Or this could look like that they might not hesitate in leveraging your help for tasks across the board, but when you require direction and help from them, you fail to get the same. We could also have a third scenario, which I feel is the most common, that you have an overwhelmed manager. They're juggling multiple team responsibilities, they're also juggling leadership expectations, they have their own professional goals to meet, and they're at their maximum, potential overkill at most times. This would mean they might not always have the bandwidth to check in on you as often as you'd like, or as often as even they'd like, right? So, there might be a great extent of interrelationship between all of these scenarios. And in all of them, it's very easy to blame the manager. But here's the thing, managers are humans too. And they are oftentimes stretched thin. They're navigating their own struggles, they're balancing multiple roles, multiple goals. Or probably they were simply never trained to lead, right? In either of these situations, instead of waiting for a perfect manager, let's talk about what you or what we can do. First step would be addressing the biggest myth, which is my manager controls my career. No, they don't. It's purely you. In your entire career trajectory, the only person to be entitled enough to be your career guardian should be you. And if you're wondering how you can do that, we'll be following a step by step guide today. The first step towards this would be documenting your wins, right? If you don't track your achievements, how will anyone else know about them? And when I say achievements, don't think about really far fetched stuff. Think about anything and everything that you're doing for your organization. Start a document. I call it the brag doc. I know many other people who call it the brag document. And this brag document is a simple list of stuff you've built, solved, improved, right? You could mention stuff like what was the impact you created with what you built? Did it save time? Did it reduce errors? Did it boost revenue? And also, what I like to do is to screenshot any compliments which I've gotten, any testimonials. If your product is highly user centric, is there any user feedback that directly relates to the features you'd worked on? Just screenshot all of that and put it in a brag doc. When review and appraisal season comes around, you don't want to be scrambling for proof and you don't want to be relying on some other person to validate your achievements. You already have each one of them documented. The good thing is that visibility can come without vanity. So although the word brag doc might, directly imply that you're bragging, but that's not how it works. You can be visible without being vain. You don't have to be loud. You do have to be seen, and that's an important difference. Instead of quoting something like, "Hey, I did this amazing thing," try saying something like, "Here's a challenge that we faced. This is the approach that I took, and this is the impact that it had." Right? Try sharing insights in meetings irrespective of your manager's presence in them. "Hey, I noticed an X trend. Should we explore Y?" Something like that. Try contributing beyond your role, stuff like docs, mentorship, or, working on internal tools. That these are the kind of contributions that go way beyond the managerial level and they are recognized at an organizational level instead. The crux is to present your work proactively, not just to your manager, but to other leaders too within the company. The third step would be to seek feedback when it's not given, right? So instead of waiting for feedback from your manager, just ask for it. There could be two likelihoods. One could be that you get the feedback right away, and the other could be that you still face a certain extent of lack of responsiveness. So, if it's the second case, let's see how you can deal with that. Instead of asking for a broader feedback, try narrowing down the question that you have. For example, ask, "What's the one thing I could improve on in my last project?" This is very specific, and this is much easier to answer rather than something which is much broader, like, "Hey, do you have any feedback for me?" Or, "Hey, how am I performing?" Right? Those are much holistic questions that come into picture. And rather than going for them, try asking for something specific. If your manager still isn't responsive, you always have an option to increase the data set you seek feedback from. Try seeking feedback from peers, right? You collaborate with them. Try seeking feedback from senior engineers or from other mentors. Try asking questions or seeking feedback from skip level managers who oversee your work, right? But if feedback is not the only thing you're looking from for, and uh, if there's like other things that also come into picture, like mentorship, we'll discuss how we'll deal with, seeking the same or like getting your hands at some mentorship. So let's take this a step further. So, by this time, you are very well aware that your manager does not have a proactive approach, whereas it is you who's seeking feedback. What do you do in a case like that? You follow the strategy of managing up effectively. And it's very simple, right? It's how you deal with every other human. Every manager has priorities. What does your manager care about? Is it deadlines? Is it efficiency? Observe their focus areas and align your work to what matters to them. If they are data driven, present result with numbers. If they value initiative, bring solutions and not just problems. Try adapting your communication style to match theirs, right? This solves lots of problems. Some managers prefer structured reports while others would prefer quick updates. So adapt accordingly. If you think too many calls would be bothering them, send a concise Slack update. If you've not been getting response to your emails, try a direct question in a meeting, right? The crux is to meet them where they are instead of expecting them to change. That's the entire crux of this entire talk that we are having here. So I remember a very specific scenario from my internship. This internship finished, I guess, around 10 months ago, when I graduated from college. So when I was a student, I was interning with this one particular organization. And I was struggling to get feedback from my manager. So every time I had a question, whether about my work, the company, or even the team structure, I'd find myself in a dilemma. Should I ask this right away and risk being seen as disruptive? Or should I hold off and wait for the right moment, right? But I would not know when the right moment would come. So, since regular check ins were really rare, I started compiling all my questions into a concise list and organizing them based on priority. Then, whenever I finally got a chance to sync with my manager, I made sure my questions were clear, direct, and easy to answer. To them, this came across as me being thoughtful about their time and ensuring our conversations were productive. But for me, it was a way to get the clarity that I had anyway needed, right? So it was a win win for both the parties. So, yeah, the ultimate goal is to make your manager's job easier and your work overall better. A busy manager will any day appreciate somebody who thinks ahead, who tries anticipating needs, right? So if you know a deadline is coming, preemptively ask for clarifications. If you think taking initiative really helps within your organization, instead of saying, "What should I do?" probably suggest a direction and ask if it aligns and just get started, right? The more proactive you are, the more trust you're going to build, and the more autonomy you're going to gain over your work, right? Most of these points work well when you're not looking for a perpetual mentorship in your career. But if you're just starting out, it's good to be mentored, right? It's good to keep getting feedback. It's good to, know where you're getting wrong, where you're going wrong, where you're not going wrong. It's good to have a realistic picture of how you're doing and where you can improve, especially if you're working in tech, right? So if it's a case, if that is the case, then go a step ahead and find external mentorship. It's not your manager's job to mentor you, right? In most of the organizations, it's not your manager's job to mentor you. Try reaching out to internal mentors, which could be other senior engineers within the company, skip level managers, or cross functional peers, right? This makes your work visible to people across the company and not just your manager, too, while you also manage to get some mentorship. So, how I used to go about it was that when there was some burning technical question that I was facing, and I was failing to get a brainstorming session with my manager on the same, I would resort to use public communication channels for discussion. So rather than DMs or rather than direct messages, I would prefer a Slack channel where I would surface my problem not just to my manager, but to the other engineers too, right? And I would get solutions. I would not just get solutions, I would rather now get much more diverse perspectives, and that too much more faster. So, if your purpose doesn't get served through this approach as well, you always have communities and networks to go to beyond your organization, right? Become part of open source groups, developer communities, industry meetups, or technical festivals such as Codebar, where you could find a great point of convention in such a case. You could get all the mentorship you need. You could ask your questions. You could explore tech areas which go beyond your work, right? So, yeah, that was one aspect of it. Another thing that I see a lot of people doing who have a moonshot mindset, and by moonshot mindset is people who think big, is people setting their own growth metrics. So, in most companies, it is usually managers who define the performance expectations. But if that's unclear for you, you can set your own, right? What are the skills you want to develop? What is the impact do you want to that you want to create? How do you want to measure success? Does it have to be speed? Does it have to be quality? Does it have to be innovation? Does it have to be all of three? And if it has to be all of three, then what's the proportion that's shared between them, right? That way, you would stay focused on progress instead of waiting for external validation. You become the leader that you were searching for throughout. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. This talk comes from a deeply personal place. So, when I started as a software engineering intern, which was around 1.5 years ago, I struggled with extreme imposter syndrome. I had no idea how I was doing. whether my work was even getting noticed, was I adding value? It felt like I was invisible to my manager and the leadership. So, in an attempt to make my contributions more visible, I tended to do was I tended to overwork myself. But no matter how much effort I put in, it felt redundant. Nothing changed until I made a choice. And this choice was that instead of waiting for recognition or direction, I took control. I applied these strategies, and slowly, I started to see a shift, not just in how my work was perceived, but also in how I was treated within the organization. That shift also ultimately led to my transition from an intern to a full time employee. I work in the same company now, by the way. So, yeah, my first hope is that everybody gets a great manager, because having one can truly accelerate your growth in the career, right? But if that's not the case, or if you've ever struggled with, feelings of professional inadequacy, I hope you walk away from this talk with something that helps you find your voice, your confidence, particularly in terms of your career. And at the end of the day, your career is totally yours to navigate. And as I've just quoted here, even in silence, you can be heard if you choose to speak up the right way. Thank you so much. Thank you for being so patient throughout. I could not go through the comments or the chat messages. I'll go to them now. You are free to ask as many questions. Those are my social media handles. Feel free to ask me questions there too if you're hesitant to ask anything here. But yes, that was pretty much it from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. I'm a huge fan of like being an an advocate for yourself and also having a brag book. I think it's particularly on some of those days as well when you're not feeling so confident or when imposter syndrome starts to kick in, it's when a brag book is particularly helpful. So I think I'm hoping that like that's something that people will definitely take away as well as all the other things as well, because it's definitely um a game changer. um, so yeah, we've got some time for questions. So if anyone has any questions for Harshita, please do drop them in the chat. You can also put your camera on and ask the question if you want as well. This is now our time, your time to ask Harshita as any questions that you have for her. Okay, let's check out chat. One question has come in. Someone has said neurodivergent thinking, so ADHD, ADD, autism might play a part here, as could anxiety and confidence on both sides of the relationship. Do you have any tips on how to deal with this?
Right. So I assume this is I am not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correct. Is it Chandeep? Right. Yeah. So thank you for such a thoughtful and such a nuanced question. When you say that neurodivergent thinking might play a part here, what is the here that is in question? Um, is it the is it the imposter syndrome, or is it the manager not being responsive?
I guess I just mean that how different people's brains work. So
Right, right, right.
let's say the manager might be super busy, but also um, maybe they're neurodivergent, mean maybe the way that their brain might be wired might be, well, lots of things really. If I was to make it wider, it could be while they're overwhelmed, maybe they're forgetting about certain things, and maybe there
Exactly.
are,
Yeah.
yeah, just stuff
Right.
like that.
Right. So maybe they're stretched too thin, or their brain has been wired a particular way. Yeah, you're absolutely right about it. I think yeah, I think the correct way to go about this is to be really empathetic. And this all boils down to, meeting your manager at a place they want to be rather than expecting them to change. So that just means probably trying to make their life easier by not bombarding them with questions if you've tried that and if you clearly see that that is not working, right? So probably take a step back, breathe with like what um I mean, when I say breathe, I mean like take a step back, try to be slightly empathetic, and try to meet them at a place where they're comfortable meeting. the best example would be to adopting to their communication style, right? If they're the kind of person who would engage in one weekly call, right? A short weekly call, try to make sure that everything that you want to be addressed is addressed based on priority in a way that it does not even overwhelm them, right? Try making your questions simpler for them too. I think that's the best way to put it, right? So that's the best way. I think empathy plays a very huge role, not just in a manager-managee relationship, but in any kind of role that we are navigating in. Tech by itself is a difficult industry to navigate, right? And I think if the people around you are empathetic and you yourself are empathetic, that just like changes the game altogether and makes life so easier.
Perfect. Thank you. Um, Another question is, have you ever heard of people switching their manager due to a better fit, such as personality or working style?
Yeah, definitely. So even I'm one of those people, uh, who eventually probably subtly asked for a change in mentorship or a change in manager, because once you've spent some time within an organization, you get a fair idea of how other people work, how they operate, whether they want to mentor or whether they want to, be an individual contributor. Although I do know some great individual contributors who turn out to be great managers too. So I think I've heard of a lot of people who switch their manager. I think the I think that's totally fine to do. But before switching your manager, I think it's good to have, spend a considerable amount of time within the organization such that you realize that, okay, it's not the same pattern that is going to repeat over and over again. You realize that, okay, whatever patterns of probably unavailability that I'm facing, they're not a cultural norm or they're not an organizational norm, but they're something that are, associated with this particular manager that I had, right? Only then will changing a manager prove to be helpful. I think, yeah. And I think since if I think if one is young and if one is just starting out, having a great manager just like, um, accelerates your career in like ways you cannot even imagine. So if you feel after all of these attempts that oh, I'm not getting the kind of response, feedback, or mentorship that I want. And this is not a cultural norm. I see other people who could probably be better mentors or managers to me. You can politely request and see how it goes.
Perfect. Perfect answer. Thank you. Um, we're changing topic now to the brag book. Someone has said they've tried it, various times in the past, and they've always struggled to keep the discipline of, keeping it up to date whenever, they've got their positive feedback. Any tips for making sure that you remember to add that feedback to your book?
Right, right. So this is actually a challenge, right? Because let's say I'm a software engineer. Most of my work is so intellectually stimulating or challenging that maintaining a brag doc could actually feel monotonous at times, right? So how I have gotten into this habit is that whenever there's so in my organization we work release by release, right? So a release goes by after every 2 weeks, right? So a release would mean that the app is getting updated, right? So what I do is that whenever I have any pull request getting merged, right? I've created this Pavlov's dog indicator for myself that as soon as I have a pull request getting merged, I'll make it a point to, mention in my brag doc all that I've done within that pull request, or, probably what that feature was, probably that what that fix was. So as soon as it is merged, I just like probably as a treat to myself, I just pull that dog up and, just so that's how I've like, trained my mind to not forget it. So a PR merge would directly for me mean, okay, I add this to my brag doc. So I've just gamified the process for myself in a way. That's how I do it. I know many people who, would sit on a Friday before they're just about to log out because it just feels nice to, reflect on the progress you've made throughout the week. So they would start by screenshotting compliments and stuff, and then they would put them in. So yeah, that's different approaches.
Lovely, thank you. I'm sure I can come up with a similar thing to releasing code. Unfortunately, I don't do that so much anymore. But yeah, I like the idea of tying it to something else. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Nice, perfect. We've had another question come in. This person is quite a new developer. They've taken a boot camp and they've not really had a manager over the past year. Well, they did, but that manager fit into the overwhelm category, and because they just had too many teams to manage. This person's felt imposter syndrome quite a bit lately, and they're not feeling as strong as others technically. What other ways could they add value to their work team whilst building up their technical skills?
Yeah. So, uh, thank you for the question. Again, it's something that I really relate to, right? So, I think you started via the bootcamp route, and eventually now you have a manager, but um, there's a mismatch between expectations and reality, right? So, since you've started via the bootcamp route, since you've become a part of, codebar now, why not find mentors, let's say not managers but mentors somewhere out in the community, right? And not look for a professional organization based manager. Why not go ahead and join some open source community, try talking about what you've built there, and then see what are the kind of people who take interest in it, and um, what are the kind of people who can probably mentor you. Coming to the topic of imposter syndrome, I think it's very natural and it's not as talked about as it should be, right? The good bit here is that you're a new developer, as you've mentioned yourself, right? So I think every capable person who wants to perform well, who wants to really grow, they definitely have this feeling of imposter syndrome, especially when they're starting out. But the surprising bit is what I've learned from people within my organization is that no matter how senior you keep getting, this feeling still stays. So I think this is a very, I would not even say this is not very characteristic to our field or our domain of technology, but this is a very human feeling. I think this comes from a place of wanting to do well in life, wanting to grow, wanting to learn more. So this is very natural. The thing is that it should not be hindering your progress, it should be pushing your progress. As long as it just motivates you to create something that is different, create something that is not conventional, it should be good enough, right? So don't give in to the feeling. uh, the fact that you are concerned about your work, that means you're going well and you're not an imposter at all, right? So that's one bit of your question. Coming to how you can add value while you build technical skills, documentation is, I think, a very good way to do that. Not many people like to do that, right? But when they're actually developing stuff and they're actually programming stuff, they value it a lot, right? As a programmer, I might not want to document, but if I'm shifting project, there's a lot of context switching and I would like to read some documentation. So when you take up a responsibility like that, I think you can add a lot of value to your team. You can also beat your imposter syndrome in the process somewhat. You can you can get noticed by more people than your manager because it's other engineers now who would be referring to your documentation, right? Somebody might get back to you with some feedback and you can just, improve that. And that's how you get a you probably just get a mentor. That's how you probably just get a right. So the idea here is to not seek for a manager, but rather a mentor if you're not getting one. Right. So it was a really multifaceted question. I hope I answered parts of it.